Hello everyone and welcome to the Hockey Hub. I'm Brennan and today we're doing another team preview and we're looking at the Los Angeles Kings. Now the Los Angeles Kings have been rebuilding the past few years and their head coach Todd McLennan said that apparently they are done rebuilding. I'm not sure if he's right about that when you look at the roster, but we are going to start off with what they added. Now, the LA Kings didn't make a lot of additions this offseason. They did make a recent signing with Andreas Athanasiou. I think that Athanasiou should fit in well in LA. He does help them get some more scoring and youth and speed, so I think that's a good signing for the LA Kings. They also traded for Olli Maatta, and they didn't have to give up a lot to get him. I do think that Maatta is still capable of performing in a bottom pairing or maybe even second pairing role, but I don't think that he can be a top pairing defender. And then another addition they made was the addition of Lias Andersson from the New York Rangers. Now this is one of those buy low situations. Lias Andersson obviously hasn't fit in well with the Rangers. He wasn't able to crack their lineup basically, and he demanded a trade, and there has been some character issue questions with Andersson. There's also been some reports that maybe there's some mental health issues with Andersson, but I don't want to get into speculation about that because that just feels wrong, and that's his business. But I'm hoping that Lias Andersson is able to turn things around in LA and hopefully turn himself into a productive NHLer. He was a 7th overall pick, a lot of expectations with Andersson, but he wasn't able to live up to them in New York, but maybe he'll be able to in LA. Now, the Los Angeles Kings didn't really lose a lot. They just lost a lot of depth guys, and some guys that have been around the team for a while, but mainly just depth guys. So they lost Ben Hutton, Tim Schaller, Joakim Ryan. They've also lost Paul Ledoux and Trevor Lewis. I know Paul Ledoux and Trevor Lewis have been playing for the Kings for a while now, so some Kings fans might be upset to see them go, but in all honesty, these guys are nothing more than bottom 6 guys or bottom pairing guys or even, 13th forwards and everything. So these aren't detrimental losses to the LA Kings. They didn't really get a lot this offseason, but they didn't really lose a lot either, so they kind of just evened out. Obviously, the draft has added a potential big piece for them, but we're going to get into that later. Now, when you look at the top 6 for the LA Kings, it's either old guys that are still decent or young guys that aren't necessarily the greatest. I do think that Andreas Athanasiou probably gets into this top 6, and I don't know if Athanasiou is a top 6 forward at this point. He is just 1 year removed from a 30-goal season, but that being said, he was absolutely brutal this past year, being one of the worst plus-minus in the NHL, and not providing that much offensively either. I think Adrian Kempe comes back into this top 6 as well. Kempe is a solid offensive forward, decent in his own zone, but not necessarily really going to be a star guy. I think Kempe is probably best suited as a middle 6 forward. I think Jeff Carter is still probably a part of this top 6 as well, and although Carter in his prime was a beast, he's not exactly that anymore. Injuries and regression have hit Carter a little bit, and you can obviously see that in his game. And the same goes for Dustin Brown, who was their former captain, but now obviously it's Kopitar. Brown has had a little bit of rejuvenation these past few years, but not necessarily enough to make him a true top 6 forward in my opinion, especially not a top line forward, which is where he's kind of projected to be. I think Gabe Vilardi probably gets into this top 6 as well. Now, obviously, Vilardi only played a handful of games for the Los Angeles Kings this past season, but he was playing in their top 6, and he actually looked damn good in their top 6. I believe he put up 7 points in 10 games and could end up being a real impact player for them. But obviously, the big guy for their forward core is still Anze Kopitar. Now, Kopitar kind of gets slighted a bit due to a result of how bad LA has been, but Kopitar is still one of the best two-way centers in the NHL. He still puts up very good offensive numbers for a two-way centerman, and obviously his defensive game is one of the best in the NHL. Kopitar is still one of the hardest players to play against in the NHL, so he's still a guy that LA Kings fans can look towards for hope and for good plays and everything. Now, the top 4 for the Los Angeles Kings is also pretty middling. I think Olli Maatta gets into this top 4 simply due to lack of better options, but Sean Walker and Matt Roy are decent options as well. Matt Roy had himself a really good year, and it actually looks like he's got some true upside, and they did re-sign Sean Walker to a 4-year contract as well, so they do expect big things from him. Drew Doughty is still the guy here, but that being said, Doughty has fallen off hardcore. I don't think that Drew Doughty is a top 10 defenseman in the league anymore. Simply, he's regressing, and I do think that playing for as bad of a team as LA does hurt him a lot, and he would probably perform a lot better on a much better team. But that being said, Doughty still isn't exactly a positive force out there for LA right now. His offense is still decent, but his defensive game and his overall game has really taken a hit. Goaltending for the Los Angeles Kings is going to be really interesting this upcoming season. Obviously, Jonathan Quick is still there, and although Jonathan Quick in his prime was one of the best goalies in the NHL, he simply isn't that anymore. Injuries have kind of hit him, and his playing style doesn't exactly make for longevity, and we're starting to see that. Quick's game has really fallen off, and I'm not sure if he's going to be able to get back to the level of even being a starter. That being said, having Cal Petersen as a backup or potential starter is pretty good. I think that Cal Petersen is one of the more underrated young goaltenders in the NHL, and I do think he does have starter upside. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to be a full-fledged starter this upcoming season, but I think having Quick and Petersen as a 1A, 1B situation isn't exactly a bad goaltending tandem. This kind of depends on if Quick is able to give them quality starts with less games played. It was kind of hard to pick out a best players or core five for the Los Angeles Kings because there's the few guys that come to mind, and then it's sort of everybody else. I would say that Matt Roy gets into this list. Roy, once again, a good defensive defenseman on the younger side, so I think that Roy should probably be in here. Obviously, Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty are still in here as well. Kopitar is still one of the best two-way forwards in the NHL, and although Drew Doughty's game has fallen off, he's still a good defenseman, not necessarily a great defenseman, not a top 10 defenseman, but still a good one. And for LA, that's definitely good enough to put you in the core 5 right now. And then to round out this core 5, I think probably Adrian Kempe and Jeff Carter would probably be in here. So that kind of goes to show that this core 5 isn't exactly the greatest for the Los Angeles Kings. Kempe is a solid middle 6 forward, and kind of the same for Jeff Carter right now, but if middle 6 forwards are in your core 5 best players, that kind of speaks to the lack of depth and high-end talent in your lineup. Now, as far as players that I want to talk about for the Los Angeles Kings, it comes down to the three young prospect centermen for them. We're going to start off with Quinton Byfield. Now, Quinton Byfield being the second overall pick has a lot of expectations, and while normally second overall picks would play in the NHL right away, I honestly believe that Quinton Byfield isn't NHL ready. That being said, I'm not sure what to do with him if you're LA, because the OHL has suspended their season, and they might not have body checking, which is ridiculous. So that really wouldn't work well for Byfield, especially since you want him to develop a physical game, being 6'4" and everything, you want him to use that big frame. So I don't think that the OHL is great for him, but I don't think that the NHL is either. Because I don't think that he's NHL ready. I think that he needs to learn how to use his size more effectively, and we've seen in the World Juniors that he is still very young, and he still struggles to, make a difference out there sometimes. He did have a very big game, though, scoring 6 points in a single game against Switzerland, so that was impressive to see, and I'm sure for LA Kings fans that was exciting to see. I do think that Byfield will be a very good centerman at the NHL level one day, although I'm not sure if it's going to be a true first-line centerman. I do have some questions about Byfield's overall game, but I still think he definitely projects as a top 6 centerman, and probably ends up being an elite offensive centerman with a strong two-way game. He's very big and very talented. But then another young centerman for them is Gabe Vilardi. Now, I touched on Gabe Vilardi a little bit previously, but I want to talk about him again. Gabe Vilardi really struggled with injuries basically after he was drafted. He was a high draft pick and with a lot of expectations, but Vilardi hadn't been able to stay healthy, and a few people were wondering, including myself, if his career was done. But he was able to get healthy. He put up really good numbers in the AHL, and then his call up to the NHL, he looked fantastic, scoring 7 points in 10 games. Vilardi can be a very big difference maker for the LA Kings as soon as this season, and if he's able to live up to that draft billing and can stay healthy, I think Vilardi is going to be a fantastic centerman. He's a young player that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think he's really going to turn some heads this season. And then another young centerman for the LA Kings is Alex Turcotte. Now, Turcotte being the 5th overall pick, I thought was a really good pickup for the LA Kings. He can play center, he can play left wing, but no matter what position he plays, he is very effective offensively. I do think that Turcotte is going to be maybe even a star at the NHL level. I was very big on him going into the draft year, and I think LA got a potential star there. So if you look at these three young centermen for the LA Kings, although their lineup right now isn't that good, their center depth for the future is insane. I imagine that one of these guys is probably going to have to move over to the wing, and I think that could end up being Turcotte. But having Byfield, Vilardi, and Turcotte as your three top prospects is an absolutely amazing prospect list. And I do think that LA has one of the best prospect pools in the NHL. They've also got good defensive prospects like Cale Clegg. So this is just a very well-rounded young group of players, and I think Kings fans should be very excited for these three guys. Although Kings fans should be excited for the future, I wouldn't be expecting much for the present right now. I would still have the LA Kings as a rebuilder despite what their head coach says. You look at their lineup and the forward core isn't good enough, the defense core isn't good enough. I think the goaltending could be good enough, but right now I don't think that Byfield is ready, and I think that will hurt their chances of being a good team this year. I think Byfield just needs 1 year to kind of work on his game, and then he should come in and be an instant impact. But yeah, so I don't see LA making the playoffs this year. I think they're going to have another tough year, but that's probably what's best for them. If they're able to get a high draft pick and maybe get a guy like Owen Power or Brandt Clark, I think that could do wonders for the future of their franchise. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.